Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to get started so that we can keep ourselves on track while people are settling in. My name is Andy Bentley. I'm the Ichthyology Collection Manager at the Biodiversity Institute and also Chair of the Local Organizing Committee. On behalf of the Biodiversity Institute and the University of Kansas, it is our pleasure to welcome you to Lawrence and the 40th annual meeting of the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections. A special welcome to... Thank you. A special welcome to our first-time attendees, all of those people who are here for the first time. If you requested a mentor, you will find a new member ribbon on the bottom of your badge. And we encourage mentors and everybody else who is here today to interact with those folks, make them feel at home, introduce yourselves to them, offer some guidance or help them make this a memorable experience for them. As you can imagine, organizing a meeting of this scale is a daunting endeavor. So I want to begin by sincerely thanking all of the members of our local organizing committee and our amazing volunteers. You'll recognize them by a volunteer or organizer ribbon at the bottom of their name badge. If you need any help at any point during the conference, please don't hesitate to reach out to them or go to the registration desk and we will endeavor to help you. If you haven't already, please pick up your name badges from registration and also your t-shirts that are now available. They look fantastic. And a great thanks to Laura Moore, who designed the logo for us this year. I also want to thank Jayhawk Hospitality. We couldn't have done this without them. They've provided a lot of logistical support before and during the meeting and have been wonderful to work with. We're also incredibly grateful to our sponsors and vendors. This meeting wouldn't have been possible without their generous support. A special thank you to our title sponsor, Delta Designs in Brazil. We encourage you to visit the exhibit fair upstairs and interact with these sponsors and vendors and check out some of the products that they've brought to the fair. And you can see a listing of all of our vendors up on the slide behind me. Also on the 6th floor is our poster area. Posters will be up for the duration of the meeting, but presenters have been asked to stand by their posters for the afternoon break today and the morning break tomorrow. So head up to the 6th floor and go and interact with those folks and have a look at their posters and see what they have to offer. New this year is the Steamed Spinach Art Auction, Artists Corner and Unconference Session, which has been set up by Deb Paul and Chandra Earl. We have over 90 pieces in the silent auction this year, with proceeds going towards supporting student attendance at future meetings. Please bid generously and often. The Artist Corner is an informal space to explore the connections between art and science. Be sure to stop by the Malott Room on the 6th floor to engage in this discussion. Lunch is provided every day, Wednesday through Friday, and will be served in the parlors just down the hall from us with seating in the ballroom. Menus will be posted at the buffet line, and meals for specific dietary needs will be available on a table at the back of the parlors. During today's lunch, we'll be hosting our Newcomers and Mentors Lunch, organized by the Spinach Networking and Career Development Committee. Tables are reserved at the front of the hall. We'll also be holding our committee fair during lunch today, a great opportunity to learn more about Spinach committees, what they do, and meet the committee members, and find out ways that you can get involved in some of these committees. Tables for the committees are positioned around the periphery of the ballroom, and there's a table tent on each one to tell you which committee it is. A few quick announcements before we get started. If you're attending tonight's trivia in Topeka, buses will depart from outside of the Union at 5:15 and 5:40. So please make sure that you are on one of those buses, otherwise you're going to miss out. We do have a couple of extra tickets, so if anybody is interested in going to trivia and did not sign up, please go down to registration and have a chat to them. Scott Ruffalo, the chair of our Spinach Publications Committee, encourages all presenters to consider submitting their work to Collection Forum, the Society's journal. Find him at the committee fair at lunch and have a chat to him if you're interested in submitting something to the journal. The KU bookstore on the 3rd floor of the Union is offering a 20% discount for anybody who goes down there. There are flyers at registration. And the Natural History Museum gift shop is offering a 10% discount to all registrants of the meeting. Also, don't forget about our ongoing BioBlitz. We have a local BioBlitz that's happening here in Lawrence and then an international one for all of the folks that are joining us on Zoom. We have over 100 observations already. I think a lot of people who went out on the field trips yesterday have been making observations. So go on, if you're going to be out and about around town, it runs from May 20th until June 8th. So you have some time to go in and do some of those. So once again, welcome to Spinach 2025. We're thrilled to have you here and look forward to an exciting, collaborative, and inspiring week ahead. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Candon Tomala, who is a professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering and the Bioengineering program, and one of 3 associate vice chancellors for research here at KU. In her administrative roles, she provides support to 5 of KU's designated research centers, including the Biodiversity Institute and Natural History Museum. Dr. Tomala.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, what an excitement to be here. And I just heard that more than 400 people in person and close to 150 over the Zoom. This is really a very exciting moment. On behalf of the University of Kansas and the Office of Research, I would like to welcome you all to the 14th annual meeting of the Society for Preservation of Natural History Collections. We are very excited to host this world's premier research and education conference at KU, promoting biodiversity collection leaders, management, training practices, among many other venues. In fact, KU's recently launched strategic plan, Jayhawk Rising, focuses on increasing engagements with local and global communities and ensuring the stewardship of the institution, and growing research, innovation, and impact, strengthening student experience. Connecting with communities, national and global, requires operationalizing the process that attracts scholar events and conferences that are aligned with the KU's unique strength and capabilities. This conference is a unique example for this. KU's Biodiversity Institute and the Natural History Museum holds great strength connecting global to national collections. Established in 1860s, Biodiversity Institute and the Natural History Museum is one of the 11 university-designated research centers at the KU, playing a critical role in globally leading innovation in biodiversity science through developing concepts, practice, and outreach, and receiving more than 40,000 visitors annually. Amazing field trips, amazing collections, all is held under the umbrella of BI and Natural History Museum. With the more than 11 million recorded biodiversity specimens and 2 million archaeological samples, BI ranks as the 30th largest natural history museum in the world and 12th largest in the US, and the 3rd largest among the public universities in the US. This conference holds a great venue to connect with the communities across global to national, collaborate and partner with international constitutes to foster connections, expand exploring the interface of collections and their impact on research and innovation and education. I wish you a very successful meeting that will foster connections, expanding the existing ones, initiate the new ones, and I hope you will also have time to attend the tours and visit the collections and the field trips too. Thank you.
And next, we'll have a few words from the director of the Biodiversity Institute and Natural History Museum, Nico Franz.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Thank you, Candon, Office of Research, and KU for your support of our institute and for our meeting. Hi, Spinach 2025. Welcome to our 40th annual meeting. We're so grateful and excited that you're here. Depending on where you arrived from, welcome to the US, to the Great Plains, to the state of Kansas, to charming and lovable Lawrence, to KU, yes, home of the Jayhawk, and to the Biodiversity Institute. We are thankful and inspired that you've made your journey to us, either in person or virtually, and to SPNHC 2025. We're somewhere above, actually, 500 national and international participants. That's a wonderful celebration and super strong reaffirmation, just in case that might be needed, of the strength, health, resiliency, resourcefulness, new prospects for our global biodiversity collections community. So let's have an amazing and future-forward conference. Just a bit about myself, please. I'm the new-ish director of the KU Biodiversity Institute and Natural History Museum. I was formerly at Arizona State University, where I led the creation of the Neon Biorepository and co-led the growth of the Symbiota software project team, now reestablished and thriving here at KU. About 10 months into this wonderful position, we at the KU Biodiversity Institute are alive and well. We're all in for modern systematics, biodiversity science, evolution and ecology, curation, data science, and above all, forward-facing collection stewardship and growth. We're poised to help lead the way for regional to global natural history collections and to design and build new models for successful collections operations and services for the broadest possible societal connections, relevance, and impact. Our meeting theme this year is Sustainable Futures, Challenges, and Opportunities for Modern Collections, which seems timely. So thank you, SPNHC, for allowing us to host this conference, thereby to both serve our community as a platform and to convey our readiness and aspirations to play major leading, partnering, and supporting roles in moving natural history collections forward in 2025 and beyond. On that note of fostering community leadership, a couple of closing suggestions, or please. First, let's have people, professional human connections and reciprocal supportive mentorship be at the very center of our meeting. Invest in our collective human resources and capabilities. We are blessed to have strong representation in this room at this conference of participants and members who are more or less advanced in our biocollections-focused careers. So if you are more senior, please look out for and make yourself accessible to new talent. Be the more experienced colleague, mentor, and career-changing supporter. Help SPNHC recruit succeeding generations into positions of sustained engagement, community responsibilities, and positions of increasing access and power. Our society will benefit from proactive and effective succession efforts. Now, this week is a great time for this. If you are more junior, well, you're here, right? So gather that final bit of internal resolve. Try your best to keep any unhelpful, if psychologically real, sentiments of professional inadequacy in check. Put yourself out there and shape and understand that your presence, your developing knowledge, and your leadership represents and shapes our future. We need your fresh and frame-breaking perspectives, ideas, and energy to get to the next stages of community growth and impact. Among other things, we need to learn from you how to lead and manage collections differently and better, and how to communicate our impact to society differently and better. Now, this week is a great time for this. So smooth. Speaking of new and necessary ways to expand and branch out, I would like to highlight as well Deb Paul's and Chandra Earle's 3 amazing steamed SPNHC Sci-Art events. Please look for them on the program and be there in huge numbers. Last not least, huge thanks to our local organizers, especially Andy Bentley and Laurie Schlenker, the BI community, Jayhawk Hospitality, our amazing sponsors. You have all made this happen. Thank you.
And last but not least, before we get to our 3 amazing speakers, a few words from our SPNHC president, Greg Watkins Colwell.
Find my notes. So normally we'd be up here and talk about the things we've done in the past year since our last meeting. Our last meeting was 38 weeks ago. So What a year 38 weeks have been. So in this time, the strategic plan has been completed and is implemented, and the committee chairs are helping us fulfill the goals of that. So please do come to the committee chairs, we're calling it a fair, the committee fair. Okay. Second is we have new conference guidelines that will hopefully help other people choose to take on the responsibility of hosting a conference. And we had elections since our last meeting 38 weeks ago. Sue Ryder is now the president-elect, and 2 new members at large, Mariana DiGiacomo and Jessica Utrip. Yay! We have a new finance committee, or a newly reborn finance committee under Barbara Tiers. We have a deputy treasurer appointed, Janaki Krishna. And we have a new sessional committee that was specifically for those California collections improvement grants. If you want to know more about that, come to the ABM. In fact, just come to the ABM. That's the last 3 things I say is come to the ABM. All right, so we'll see you at the ABM.
All righty, we're doing great on time. So with that, I'll move on to our 3 wonderful speakers today. Our first speaker is Dr. Daniel Wildcat. Dr. Wildcat is a Yuchi member of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma. His service as a teacher and administrator at Haskell spans nearly 40 years. Dr. Wildcat received an interdisciplinary PhD from the University of Missouri in Kansas City. In 1994, he partnered with Kansas State University to create the Haskell Environmental Research Studies Center, or HERS. He is a noted speaker on traditional ecological knowledge and has offered programs for NOAA, NASA, and many scientific organizations and universities. Dr. Wildcat is currently the principal investigator of a $20 million 5-year NSF-funded project to develop the Rising Voices Changing Coasts Research Hub at Haskell, a research hub where Indigenous knowledge will be intrinsic to the climate science developed to understand climate change impacts on Indigenous coastal peoples of the US and its territories. He is the author and editor of several books, including Red Alert, Saving the Planet with Indigenous Knowledge, which suggests Indigenous ingenuity, or indigenuity, is required to reduce the environmental damage in the Anthropocene. Dr. Wildcat's most recent book, Indigenuity, Learning the Lessons of Mother Earth, was released in 2023 and continues this theme. Raven Bookstore from Lawrence, Kansas will be outside the hall here a little later after this session, selling some of Dr. Wildcat's books. If you're interested in picking one up, they should be right outside the doors. So with that, the provocative title of Dr. Wildcat's presentation is A Question: What story do we tell about ourselves in natural history museums? Dr. Wildcat.
Sanle Koyasate, thank you for that nice introduction, Andrew. Agela san, sangele, zoyaha yuchiha muskogi, shidane yadane. Good morning, beautiful people. My name is Dan Wildcat. I am a Yuchi member, a child of the sun member of the Muskogee Nation. You've heard of state-recognized tribes, right? You've heard of federally recognized tribes. The Yuchi happen to be a federally misrecognized tribe. That's not the only thing they've ever gotten wrong, by the way, about indigenous people. But, you know, I just want to express my gratitude for the invitation to make a few remarks today. I will share an indigenous worldview, not the indigenous worldview, but a view consonant with many indigenous peoples in North America. It is a worldview which I think might be very useful to folks wanting to think deeply about their work in natural history today. I will not take much of your time, so if you are interested in my thoughts today that I'm going to share, we will figure out how to continue a conversation in the future, I hope. If you find what I say not useful or off-putting, I will have at least not taken a large part of your day. And like I say, you know, if you really just find what I say absolutely ludicrous and repugnant, what I think you should do is buy one of my books and then give it to a colleague you really dislike, okay? So we both win. We both win that way. Okay, so let me start with, you know, it's almost ubiquitous, I think, when you start discussions about the environment, about natural history. And this quote is well known, and it's E.O. Wilson's quote. In fact, if I lecture in one of my classes about E.O. Wilson, you see them on their phones, and they'll inevitably pull up this quote that goes like this. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and God-like technology. And it is terrifically dangerous. And it is now approaching a point of crisis overall. Of course, this assessment came in a September 9th, 2009 discussion between E.O. Wilson and James Watson at Harvard University. It happened to be on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species, 150th anniversary of the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species. The quote is memorable, but sadly, the short prefatory remarks are seldom included. The quote comes in response to the following question. Are we humans equipped, and I quote, with our delicate brains to address the monumental problems we face in the next 100 years, including global climate change? Wilson responded in the affirmative, stating, I think we will be if we are honest enough and if we are smart enough. Let's be honest. We have a problem with honesty right now in the world that we inhabit. We live among many people who are dishonest. This is a problem. It's a human problem. And it is essentially, I would argue, a cultural problem. I'm going to make, my remarks are going to be based on wisdom that's been shared with me. So, you know, I'm not quite a half century yet, but I'm approaching my 40th year, or in my 40th year at Haskell Indian Nations University. How many of you in here know about Haskell? Okay, good. That's excellent. So, you know, we're the de facto United Nations of Indigenous Higher Education in the United States. There are only 2 tribal colleges that are chartered directly by the U.S. Department of Interior Bureau of Indian Education. That's funny because when I used to talk to my dear friend and mentor, Brian Deloria Jr., he said, oh, I hear you're now working for the Bureau of Indian Education. I said, well, that's what they tell me. And he said, isn't that an oxymoron? And there's something to that, I think, you know. But Haskell is unique because we're chartered to serve every federally recognized tribal nation in the United States. So I just want to paint a picture of the kind of environment, social environment community I've been part of for nearly 40 years. It's an environment where it's not unusual to have a Seminole from South Florida, a Yupik person from the Arctic, Passamaquoddy from Maine, a enrolled Rancheria member from Los Angeles County. And you can imagine, and a lot of Northwest Indians, we just have an incredible demographic profile. Since COVID and before COVID, about the last decade, that time, if we just kind of take the COVID period out of the mix, we've been averaging over 100 federally recognized tribes every academic year represented on our campus from over 40 of the 50 states. We are not chartered to serve Hawaiian natives because they have a different status, their relationship with the federal government. So I've had this incredible experience of moving all around what we euphemistically call Indian country. And so what I'd like to share is some of the wisdom that has been shared with me by people like Albert Whitehat. How many know Albert Whitehat? See, it's a shame, but Albert Whitehat was a Lakota language teacher at Santa Galiska University on the Rosebud Reservation. How many have heard now those from the Northwest, I know this is a softball question. How many of you have heard of Billy Frank Jr.? All right, legendary leader of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. How many of you have heard the name I mentioned earlier, Vine Deloria Jr.? Okay, a few people. Yeah, we've got, so I've had this incredible interaction with people that, for the most part, didn't have any letters after their names, but they had an incredible knowledge and wisdom about the places they called home. And I think part of the challenge that we have today is that we've forgotten, we humans, with our beautiful but delicate brains, that life on the planet is not all about us. So I'm going to try to make 4 basic points, and I know I won't have time to expand on these much, but I think they will be, I hope, challenging to you, and as you think about your work, working with natural history collections, natural history museums, institutions. So it's interesting. I did not know the source of this quote. I had to look it up. You know, you find the quote everywhere, but very few people will give you the information about, well, where did that come from? I didn't think it was in one of his books, so I found it was that debate. And then that's when I saw the remarks that set up that larger well-known quote. I think if we are honest enough and if we are smart enough, we might be able to address some of the challenges that we face. And so what I'm going to talk today is about AI. Now, I see some of you going, AI, what's that got to do with it? Oh, well, I mean to qualify this. I'm not talking about AI, artificial intelligence 2.0. I'm talking about AI 1.0, ancestral intelligence. That's what we're missing today, folks. Ancestral intelligence. Now, let's begin with a statement of fact. Everyone in this room has a heritage, a genealogy where you existed much longer as humans on this planet, not as citizens of nation states, but as members of tribes. How well do we know that history? Not very well. Not very well. And that's a critical part of who we are. So I'm going to talk about AI. And the interesting thing about ancestral intelligence, indigenous, I'm going to focus strictly on North America, that's what I'm most familiar with, is that we find among many tribes these basic kind of insights that in their cultural traditions, their worldviews, that they have been bequeathed by their ancestors, we find these things very widely accepted. And so we might benchmark this in Western history. We might say, well, with Darwin, we at least had the beginning of the recognition that life on this planet shares a history, a biological history, right? And then we had, 100 years later, Watson and Crick come up with the double helix and tell us about DNA. And now we confirm the fact that, in terms of the mechanics of our biology with the DNA processes, we really are all related. All life on this planet. I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma, so I hesitate to speak other indigenous languages because I never quite lose that Oklahoma twang. But I've tried it with my Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota speakers, and they're not too offended. They say, we'll give you a C on that. There's a phrase, when I got to Haskell, I had never really traveled that much into the Northern Plains, but a lot of our tribal colleges are in the Northern Plains. And so I started going to meetings there. Every time I'd go to a meeting at Rosebud Reservation, Pine Ridge, Standing Rock, I'd hear when they ask elders to offer invocations, I'd hear this phrase. I bet there's at least one person in this room who's heard this. And again, forgive my accent, but it sounds to my ears like Matakiwe Oyase. Matakiwe Oyase. How many have heard that phrase before? Okay, I've got a couple of people. Okay. I didn't know what that meant. And, but I knew it was important because I kept hearing that phrase used over and over again. I had a student from Pine Ridge, Francis Levere. He was one of my students. This would have been late 80s. And I asked Francis, I said, hey, Francis, I just came from a meeting up in South Dakota. And, you know, I always hear this phrase every time an elder is asked to give an invocation. And he says, what is it? And I said, Matakiwe Oyase. Can you tell me what that means? He says, how long are you going to be in your office? I thought, man, this is going to be quite a digression. I said, well, I'll be here, you know, till about 5 o'clock. He said, okay, I've got to run to my room and get something. And he ran to his room, got back, you know, got a pretty good sized campus. It took about 15, 20 minutes. He gets back. Now, again, this tells you something about pop culture in the 80s. I mean, we make fun of this today, but there was a time when buttons were kind of popular and people would like to wear buttons. Well, he had a button, and it was about that large. And the button was that first image of Earth taken from outer space. Yeah, it's often referred to as the blue marble image. And written across it was Matakiwe Oyase. He says, this is Matakiwe Oyase. He said, when we pray, we do not pray for ourselves. We pray for our mother and all of our relatives. All of our relatives. The life on this marvelous blue-green planet Earth. And then it really struck me how powerful that was. Here are people that don't get up and ask for something, but give thanks for this life that surrounds us, and often ask, you know, for the ability to be mindful of this beauty that surrounds us. So, AI 1.0. I think one of the challenges we have today, and I think in this room, I don't think this will be too terribly controversial, but I think it could create awkward situations. I'm going to ask every one of you today to leave this room and never think about natural resources again. As my Lakota and Nakota speaking relatives would tell us, we're all related. We don't live in a world of resources. We live in a world of natural relatives. Think of that slight shift in your thinking. We don't live in a world of natural resources. We live in a world of natural relatives. That's my first point. Let's be honest. Let's call it what it is. We live in a world of natural relatives, not resources. And then here's what's looming. The age of the Anthropocene. It's all about us. Yeah, yeah, who are those resources for? Well, us, of course, humans. Well, I got news for you. At my family, in my family, if you show up, the only time you show up is when you want something. If that dirt road's long enough and they see you coming, they close the blinds, the curtains, lock the front door, turn all the lights off, and pretend like no one's at home. Because you don't treat your relatives like resources. We've been behaving fairly badly, folks. We've been behaving very, very badly. Now, I know this is not easy. The institutions that we are a part of are built on certain ideas. And so the first point I'm going to emphasize is let's admit, let's call it out. Let's begin to act and behave in the way that science and ancestral indigenous knowledge teaches. We do not live in a world full of resources. We live in a world full of relatives. And we need to change our conduct and our behavior and how we interact. Now, this leads immediately to a second principle that's widely shared. And, you know, it's a logical corollary with the first principle, right? So we live with relatives, not resources. I don't know of any peoples on the planet who honor and respect the unique gifts each of you possess. We're not all the same, we're different. And people who want to honor the freedom and the liberty to develop those gifts to their fullest. That's an old idea. It's been around a long time. What's different in indigenous traditions of governance is we talk a lot about rights, but we never talk about inalienable rights unless those are coupled with unalienable responsibilities that we possess as human beings. When was the last time you heard someone running for Congress get up and give a speech about our human unalienable responsibilities? I don't know if I'll live to see it, but I hope I do. I'd love to see.
Hey, Angel.
Run for office and talk about our unalienable
How are you?
responsibilities. And see, it's a corollary. Why?
I'm tired.
Think of
Haven't
how
recovered from all of the
governance changed
festivities.
in the world if we didn't spend so much money in courts litigating who had the right to use
Yes, take it.
that water, that land, that resource.
Contracted with this one auto
And
care
instead,
service.
we shift the whole,
And my dad insisted I go there.
right, the whole framework.
So how did you get back to Lawrence?
Right, should
My
be,
friend took me
what
to
is
the
our
same
responsibility
Oh.
to the water?
So you have your
What
breakfast
is
with you.
our
Bring breakfast.
responsibilities
okay.
to the
When
land?
we're putting in the fridge.
Ah,
To the
well,
earth.
congratulations on the graduation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
We are
still
kin.
don't feel like it's real that I'm completely done. I
You
don't
know,
think it's
one
gonna
of the
feel
things
real
that's
until my
difficult, I think,
date.
it-
And I'm like actually moving.
Western tradition. is
Well, that's
that
coming soon
there's
enough,
a
right?
tendency towards being
Yeah,
very biased.
I didn't put stuff in my
And
pocket
so
just yet.
you know,
Someone's not
Please
muted.
turn your speaker off.
I'm glad to see so many young faces in here. This is promising. But those of you who look like me, we grew up in a time when people still ask the question, is it nature or is it culture? And we have this invidious nature-culture debate. Well, one of the things you have to understand about those first two principles, right, is that they were born by people who never saw themselves at odds with the natural world. In fact, their cultures were emergent out of a longstanding symbiotic relationship between particular peoples and particular places. There's a reason why when you go to the Northwest Coast, you're not going to be invited to a bison ceremony. You will, if you're lucky, be invited to a salmon ceremony. There's a reason why when you go across the southern United States, my people, the Zoyaha and our Muskogee and our Choctaw, Chickasaw relatives, probably our most important ceremony is our green corn ceremony. The plains, the bison, across the southern United States, corn. Thanksgiving ceremonies about our closest relatives, different than human relatives. The Northwest, the salmon, the plains, the bison. Now, this isn't romanticism. What I'm describing is indigenous realism. And what I'm describing is at some point in your ancestry, you had a lot of relatives who understood this very deeply. We can recapture that, I believe. And I'll say a little bit about that at the end. So I've made two main points. I'm halfway through, okay? So what was point one? Yes, we're going to walk away from the miseducative idea of living in a world of natural resources and embrace the fact that we live in a world full of natural relatives. That's going to lead us to say, yeah, we understand inalienable rights, but we also understand those are figuratively, and I might even say invoked literally, groundless, unless we couple those with unalienable responsibilities. Now, this leads to the fourth point. I don't want anyone to think about what I'm suggesting here is going to imply somehow that we go back to the past. You can't do that, folks. You know? And for a long time when I would talk about these kinds of things, and I'll make some comments about AI 2.0 and technology here at the end of the talk, but people would think, you know, I'd always have people think, oh, you're some kind of you know, indigenous Luddite. You're just against technology. And I thought, no, I can handle that pretty easily. And then they really hit me with the most damning, you know, criticism you can ever receive if you're in higher education. And that is, oh, I understand you're against progress. I had to think about that a long time. And I thought, well, the more I thought about it, but how do you define progress? Well, it seems like we live in a world where, you know, progress is largely, let's face it, and the employment of technology is largely fueled by, will it make our lives more comfortable? Will it make our lives more convenient? And if you're in the School of Business, you're always thinking, and will it put some capital gains in my pocket? Those are the 3 C's of modern progress: human convenience, human comfort, capital gains. And it is that kind of thinking that has put us into the global environmental crises we have. We've been working very good as extracting resources and placing ourselves at the center of creation, above it all in some way. Ian Tattersall's book was interesting to read. The last book he did in 2012. Or that's probably not the last book he wrote, but that's the last book I read. And it was called, you know, Masters of the World. And I thought, man, that's ominous. masters of the world. Well, you know, he gives a very circumspect view of this. I mean, it's not all rosy, but he does make the point that we've certainly done a lot to change the planet. I don't know in that book he actually jumped forward to endorse this notion of an Anthropocene, but he certainly admits that we've changed the planet, humans, our behavior, our conduct, and largely with technology. And so every time I'd hear this, you're against progress, I started thinking, well, okay, you know, it's easy to do negative critiques, but state what you're for. And so when I was writing my book, Red Alert, which is misnamed, but we can talk about that later. Red Alert, I ended with this kind of, after reflecting on what I had written, I said, okay, I've got to be for something. What am I for? This isn't just a negative critique. And I realized that, you know, I am probably not a big supporter of an anthropocentric notion of progress because it isn't all about us. Life on this planet is not all about us. And yet that's the way we think about progress. That's the way we measure progress. And so what am I for? And then it occurred to me, well, what am I for? I would like to see the best and brightest of this next generation, my granddaughter, my grandson, working to say, is it possible for humans to live in such a way that we promote systems of life enhancement on this planet? I don't think that's unrealistic at all. I think that's a good scientific project. Architects, there's some architects and designers that are already trying to do this, you know, the zero carbon, the green buildings, and, you know, even so-called living buildings and buildings that at the end of the day, actually their systems are such that they do more positive things in their immediate environment than they do extracting and then dumping negative things into it. So that's my fourth point. I think we need to really recalibrate a notion of progress. My suggestion would be we think about how we use technology, how we use our evolutionary tool-making ability and character as human beings to promote systems of life enhancement on the planet. So what's the fourth principle I want to share? So been kind of this comparison. Now we're going to leave behind resources and move to a deeply relational view of relatives. We're going to counterbalance or, you know, couple inalienable rights with unalienable responsibilities. We're going, point three, we're going to recalibrate progress. It's not all about us. Improvement might be, how can we promote systems of life enhancement on the planet? Now, here's the bad news. This is going to be very hard work. We are immersed in institutions that are largely dedicated to the things that I've said we ought to leave behind. Systems of governance that are all about inalienable rights. I don't know about some of you, but I hate, you know, you got to be honest. I had family members during COVID who told me I'm not going to wear a mask. You know why? You're violating my inalienable rights. And I said, do you have any unalienable responsibilities? The world we're a part of. Well, see this kind of transactional reality we're immersed in now. What's in it for me? So I'm going to leave you with a fourth idea. It's not mine. It's been kind of in the ether in Indian country for at least 2 decades. I've heard a lot of people talking about it, and I've decided, well, okay, I'm going to try to explore this and examine it. And it's called, I would call it a theory of governance based on, in quotes, right relations. The one thing that I'm so glad to have the opportunity to speak to people who know and understand our life is so much a product of these multiple complex relationships that make up the biosphere of this planet Earth. And yes, they have histories and we see change over time. What I'd like to suggest is that as we move forward, the thing that we must think most deeply about is how do we place ourselves in right relations with the land, the air, the water? That's what we need. Now, I'm going to tell you a story. I do not have, I always want to give credit to wisdom holders who shared, something that I've found very valuable and useful. This happened at a meeting at White Mountain Apache Reservation in East Central Arizona over 25 years ago now. And it was the first, no, I think it was the second or third intertribal GIS meeting. So GIS was really the cutting edge thing, early 90s. The tribes were getting into GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And as you might expect, I was invited, by the way, by an adjunct who is teaching at Haskell, and who was a USGS employee, and he knew about this GIS meeting. He said, Dan, we got to go to this meeting. I was at that time dean of the College of Natural and Social Sciences. And so we went. And so as you might expect, a lot of younger people there, really super enthusiastic about GIS. And I noticed at the end of day one, there was one guy who didn't fit the profile. He was an older guy. If you had a stereotype of a cowboy Indian, he was it. He had a cowboy hat, jean jacket, flannel shirt, boots, the whole bit, And he just sat there very quietly. Never said a word day one. Day two, we're doing our final wrap-up session. And everything was talking about the tool, GIS, and all the things we could do for it. And final plenary panel, they said, we'd like to hear questions from the audience. And I saw this man raise his hand, and I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. I thought, I bet this is going to be interesting. And he stood up and he said, yes, I have a question for you all. He says, I'm really, fascinated with this technology. He says, but would some of you, anyone, like to address the relationship of this technology to the natural law? And you saw people kind of going like, the natural law? The natural law, And so then the moderator did what all good people do. When you're asked a question, you don't even know what they're asking. Sir, could you repeat the question? And that was his cue. He stood up and he said something I've thought about, and this is a great audience to share this story with. He said, yes, there is a natural law, he said. And as we develop tools and technologies, we should never forget it. We must respect the land, the air, and the water. And if we don't, there will be penalties. You will pay for disrespecting the air, the land, the water. He says if your, infractions are egregious enough, possible we could receive a death sentence. Well, I want to leave on a happy note. Everything I've been talking about, by virtue of our evolutionary history, is a cultural issue. Those are the things we have choice about. We have a choice now, folks, and that is to embrace a world full of relatives, honor responsibilities we have as good human relatives to the balance of life on this planet, and to try to live in such a way that we are placing ourselves in right relations with the balance of creation. We need to tell a different story today about our past. We need to be honest, and we need to know that it's not all about our rationality. So here's one thing that ancestral intelligence does. We honor the affective dimension of our humanness. Maybe we need to get in touch with those remnant Paleolithic emotions that still plague us. Weird emotions like kinship for relatives other than humans. And I think I'm just grateful to have this opportunity to speak to you all about this, because I think those of you working with natural history, with collections, and I hope you will take this seriously when you think of those specimens no longer as resources, but remember, you're in the care of relatives, taking care of relatives. We have incredible challenges, but let's be honest. The climate change we need right now is a cultural climate change. The physical stuff's easy. Well, I mean, it's easier. The tough stuff is our interrelatedness, the institutions we move through. Any of you who are managers here, I think you will agree with me, when you're overseeing scientific products, the biggest problems you have aren't with the products you want to produce, it's with the scientists you have to work with. No, I mean that lovingly. That's a human. See? We're humans. We have feelings. We have emotions. So, I'm a little over here, and so I'm going to wrap this up. I'll conclude this way. My most recent book on indigenuity, I started reading poetry and then I started writing poetry, because I thought there's some things I can't convey with just that rational, linear, logical prose. And so I started reading poetry, really became an incredible fan of Pablo Neruda and a lot of, Walt Whitman, you name it, a lot of different poets. And I'm going to give you a short version of a longer poem if you choose to buy on indigenuity. You'll find in the books. I've got poems. It's an extended essay, and I've got poems between different sections of this essay. And it goes like this. Beauty surrounds us, much ugliness too. This our wise ones tell us. Both are real, but only one is true. And the question is, which will guide you? The ugliness around you or the beauty residing within you and abiding all around you? Sanlai Koyasate, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today.
Thank you, Dr. Wildcat. We probably have time for one very quick question if anybody has one.
I get this response from students, either we don't know what the hell he said, or else very unlikely I was perfectly clear, so no one has any questions. So any questions? You're going to ask me to leave here thinking, well, I must have actually been perfectly clear for once, because these people seem to get it. Okay. Well, thank you so much again for this invitation to be here today, Andrew. Thank you. Oh, we got one down here. Okay.
Grab the microphone.
I was just going to ask how you advocate with politicians. How do you try to reach that audience?
Good question. How do you work with politicians? Well, I tell you what you do every time you get a chance to speak with one. I think you just do so very, very directly and honestly. You realize the kind of environment they work in. You realize they're always going to listen. And so you try to make what you say count. So right now, my focus is on telling politicians that the attack on the legal and policy protections that we struggled to create for the land, the air, and the water, and the life that depends on those is top priority. I mean, we are in a situation where the consequences of not respecting that natural law are going to be very costly. Yeah.
All righty, moving along. Our next speaker is Alexander Kolodeskeri. Alexander worked for over 16 years in various marketing, sales, and leadership roles at Sara Lee and Nestle in the Netherlands, Spain, Czech Republic, Switzerland, and Hungary, before joining a global carpet and artificial grass manufacturer as CCO in 2007. He became CEO in 2012 and led the company until its acquisition in 2015. Under his leadership, the company Deso became recognized as a global leader in cradle-to-cradle and circular economic principles. Following Deso, Alexander served as CEO in Princeton Burning Group, a leading European sports nutrition company. In November 2019, Alexander joined Brunzil as CEO, a role he held until October 2024, after which he transitioned to chairman of the group. Under his leadership, Brunzil repositioned itself as the footprint reduction company, driven by its mission, creating space for a healthy planet. Alexander is very passionate about the museum industry and the sustainable preservation of precious collections. The title of his presentation is Creating Space for a Healthy Planet. Alexander.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Wildcat. Great presentation. My ancestral intelligence, I think more background, is I'm part of the Dutch tribe, and we as Dutch, 2/3 of our country is below sea level. So we know very well the consequences of water, so to say, of land in that sense. And we are an incredibly dense population. When I was I'm now an old man struggling to get on stage, but when I was young, say 40 years ago, we were about 13 million people. We're now 20 million people. We have industry and everything in a very dense place. So air and air health, right? Think of fine dust or all the CO2 and other emissions is critical for longevity and having a good, healthy life, which we all aspire, I think. What I want to take you through is, I'm not a politician. I'm the manager, you say. But I strongly believe as a commercial organization, which we are, that it's all about people, planet, and thirdly, the profit. And why you also need to make a profit, because if you want to change things, our system we live in is also that you need resources. In this sense, I refer to profit as resource and not as relative, if you don't mind, to finance, invest, and make steps. Now, in Deso, we worked strongly with an American architect, Bill McDonough, cradle-to-cradle guru, and a German scientist, head of Greenpeace, Michael Braungart. Now we work also with Michael Braungart, professor in Hamburg and former head of science of Greenpeace. So what I'd like to take you through is a presentation on which we explain how we want to contribute in our part to preserve your precious collections. And you collect things, I would say, in a museum and do research and work with it if you feel it's relevant for society, for the universe, and generations for, say, 500 years, if I speak to people in the museum world. So why go for solutions which basically destroy the planet in 80 years or 50 years and don't contribute, right? So that's the theme of my presentation. But before I go in, we want to share a few things with you based on the research done by ICOM, and ICOM is the International Council of Museum. Who is familiar with the International Council of Museum? Quite a lot of you. Good. So glad to hear. And I'll take you through a few studies on research on over 1,000 applicants to see what your main concerns are. And I like to see if that resonates with what I'm trying to say. So I think, why it matters, I think already referring in a visual way to what Dr. Wildcat was referring to. Melting ice caps, rising sea levels, floods, droughts. You pay the ultimate penalty, as you say. And if you see many parts of the world, starvations or, also death. And that's the thing we can avoid. And I don't believe we're too many people in the planet. I think we just should do things in a much smarter way. And that's also a more positive message. So, as you know, many countries, tribes, organizations agreed to the Paris Climate Agreement and basically said, okay, we don't want to increase the temperature more than 1.5 Celsius. So I'm sorry, it's not Fahrenheit, but you know what I mean, I guess. I can't translate it in Fahrenheit, so apologies for that. And that should mean that we should drastically reduce these emissions we're currently having, and by 45% by 2030, and to be totally zero by 2050. Now, if you look what the UN recently published is that instead of declining 45%, we're going up, right, by 9%. So we're going definitely in the wrong direction, in case anyone was wondering. And why can we contribute in our business making smart solutions is because buildings, so think of the building equipment, so concrete, steel, all the elements you put in a building. And we as human beings live 90% of our time indoor these days, right? In general, I would dare to say. Buildings are responsible for 40% of annual CO2 emissions. And that's also got to do with the lighting, right? The air conditioning, the heating, the cooling. So if you can do things on buildings, you can dramatically reduce already CO2 emissions. Now, we try to capture that in an animated movie, and I think it takes about 2 minutes, and I'll show you in a minute. But before that, what are the 10 key concerns you guys indicate in the museum storage around the world, right? This is based on a research done in October or May last year. And those 10 points, I guess you recognize them. It's lack of adequate funding, right? It is space shortage, inadequate. So we do have storage units, but they're not adequate because they don't protect or they don't handle well. It's incomplete documentation systems. Well, you have something to specify here. I'm sure we'll discuss about that later. I learned about it yesterday. Staff training management, preventive conservation issues, accessibility and communications, right? So see the visibility of your storage. There's also where specify plays a role. Infrastructure maintenance, security contents, and the impact, lastly, not leastly, of climate change. So if you then ask, and I'll try to address in my presentation what we can contribute to your concerns, right? And you, please, in breaks or afterwards, challenge me, and I love to learn from you what else you need. Because if you're happy, we will in the end be happy. So it's very simple. So the museum storage around the world, 1,100 participants. If you see the amount of museums, nearly every 25 years, the last years, they are doubling, right? So I'm happy to share the presentation in details, but if you see over the last year, 75, 2004, 24, doubling. So meaning more buildings, more CO2, right? What can we do? Then if you ask the people, so what growth do you see in your collection? Well, 60% says, well, they've grown about 5 to 10% in the last 10 years. And 27% says, well, we have grown more than 50% in space, in collections over the last 10 years. And then if you ask people, okay, that's growth, but then are your collections stored in the right way, in a way that it protects them for the next 500 years? Well, then 55% says, yes, well, anyway, we have spaces designed specifically to house collections. And 45% is probably under a stairway or somewhere in the basement ceiling where it's not necessarily designed to store properly. I see already nodding faces. And only a quarter of you, 1 in 4, says, well, the storage spaces, they meet our needs, right? And 75% says it does not meet our needs. So I would dare to say, Houston, we have a problem, right? Then if you say, okay, on-site storage, your depot, 1 in 3 says we have run out of space. And if we go off-site, it's 1 in 4, right, who have run out of space. So you need more space, you need the right space, you need an area conditioned to store your precious collections for the next 500 years, and you need to do that in a sustainable way, that if you're collecting for 500 years, the planet will be around in 500 years. If not, what's the purpose? So what's our vision? Well, we are a contributor, hopefully, but that's for you to judge, in creating space-saving storage solution, contributing to a sustainable planet. We call it creating space for a healthy planet. Now let's try and show that in a 2-minute movie, and it should run automatically, or should I press a button? Marius, I should press another button. And there we go.
In a world where space is a scarce and valuable asset, we dedicate ourselves to help organizations to use space in the most efficient and effective way. As the footprint reduction company, we achieve this by providing space-creating solutions that contribute to a sustainable planet. According to the United Nations, the construction of buildings and its operations account for nearly 40% of the world's CO2 emissions. The use of our space-creating solutions reduces the physical footprint needed, and with that, the use of natural resources. Less space means less costs and has a huge impact on the environmental footprint. We apply best practices in energy and water stewardship, combined with great attention to material health. Our commitment is to continue to be the most sustainable producer in the industry, improving the planet, as well as the well-being of every individual working with our solutions. We call this creating space for a healthy planet. Bruinzeel is climate neutral in its own operations, and we are on our way to reach the Paris Climate Agreement in 2045. This makes every space-creating solution by Bruinzeel, by definition, a sustainable choice.
Okay, so And the Paris Climate Agreement, we've advanced. We will be climate neutral is our view in 2035. I'll come to that in a minute. So basically by storing stuff on a mobile instead of a static solution, right, you create space or you save space, whatever you want to call it. And by doing so, and I'll explain that in more detail, you save up to 80% on annual CO2 emissions over a 20 years period. Then also, if you look at the materials you choose, it matters tremendously on the environmental impact. So if you choose solutions we manufacture, you can reduce over 20 years period the CO2 emissions not by 80%, but by 98%. So the last 2% we still have a challenge. And then everything I'm saying is not just because I'm saying it. It's not me saying I'm very good. Probably I do also, but it's also that over the last 4 years, you have Deloitte, an accounting firm who has confirmed independently that we are climate neutral as an operations in scope 1, 2 greenhouse gas emission protocol. And I'll explain that in a minute. EcoVadis is a rating with gold rated company. We are linked since 21 and assessed by science-based target. Is that rings a bell to people, you, and so basically we like outside institutions to avoid any perception on greenwashing. Now this is all very nice. If you are familiar with the greenhouse gas emissions protocol, are you all familiar? Or should I briefly explain? So basically, if you want to say I have emissions and I want to be neutral, the greenhouse gas emissions protocol defines 3 scopes. So scope 1 is your direct emissions, so your direct energy in our case, right? If we focus on CO2. So think of gas, for instance, a fossil fuel. When you use it, you have off-gassing. Scope 2 is indirect energy. Now, indirect energy is like electricity, right? So that's not, we have a resource of electricity, but you have a windmill or a solar panel and you generate electricity. Now, we, on all the scope 1 and 2 emissions, so the direct energy we use, gas, indirect, electricity, we are CO2 neutral worldwide, right? So that means that gas is biogas coming from the residue on corn, you mentioned corn, or other crops, or animal fertilizer, right? And then in the indirect energy, we use solar and wind. That's great. So we're climate neutral, right? Scope 1 and 2. That's great. But then look at the numbers. And on the 100% of emissions, right, over a 20 years period, 10% is scope 1, 2. 90% is scope 3. So the big BHAG to solve is scope 3. Now, if we look at our scope 3, 90% of our scope 3 is raw materials. And of that 90%, it's steel, right? Now we, and I'll come to that in a minute, have found a solution by working with steel mills, and ArcelorMittal is a global steel mill, and we are the top 5 customer, is to procure steel which is close to CO2 neutral. So basically already now we are able to provide you with solutions which go up to 90%, 98% CO2 reductions over a 20 years period. So it's not impossible at all. It is very much possible. And I'll show you that in more detail. Now, many of you are interested in the next generations, the planet, and preserving the planet, and having your grandchildren or your children or your partners or ancestors or people coming after you to have a great life and to work on your collections. It's the same with us. So CO2 is a very important element. But others say, yeah, but we also need to pay for it, right? Yes, I understand. And it takes time, whatever we do. Now, by going to a mobile solution, and certainly ours, it's not only CO2 saving, but you save a lot of money because you make the building smaller, and it goes much faster because you don't have permitting. So there's basically no argument I can think of by not doing it the right way. Save whatever angle you take, whether it's money saving, time saving, or CO2 saving. But let's go a bit to the details. So these details have also been audited by Holtara, which is a global environmental consulting firm, and Deloitte. So what I'm saying here has that stamp. It's not just me, Alexander, saying, we're fantastic. So if you look at standard steel production, and this is a bit boring, but it's important to understand, on a kilo of galvanized steel, and many companies are using galvanized steel in our industry. Why? Because galvanized is being treated with zinc zinc baths with a lot of energy and a lot of heat and a lot of unpleasant stuff, polluting the environment. But the benefit of zinc is if you use it outdoor, for instance, for traffic signs, you avoid corrosion, right? If with rain or with salt or whatever. But you shouldn't use it indoor because you don't have those environmental impacts, and it's bad for your collection, and it's bad for the world, and it's a high CO2 emission. And if you take 1 kilo of galvanized steel, it is 2.9 kilos of CO2 emissions, right? Then other people also here in the US, okay, we don't use galvanized because we got you, Alexander, but we use oiled steel. And why do we use oiled steel? Because oil protects from corrosion in transport from the mill to the factory, and I can touch it in the factory and it won't have any corrosion. And then after I've bended it or cut it or whatever, I'm going to put it through a machine, and before I can dye it, I can paint it, I first need to take the oil off, and I do that with a lot of water and a lot of chemicals and a lot of stuff, which is not good and unnecessary. So if you look what we do, we take unoiled steel, non-galvanized. We are scope 1, 2 climate neutral. So if you take a standard Bruinzeel kilo of steel, we talk not 2.9 kilos of CO2, not 2.7 kilos of CO2, but 2.4 kilos of CO2. Still not good, but already a first step. Now, what is the new thing we now offer, and that's for about 15% of our sales, is Bruinzeel green steel. And what is green steel? Well, that's steel. If you know steel, iron ore, right? If you want to separate the iron of the oxygen, you have to have an inductor, and you add cokes, Cs. And then you get the chemical reaction with a lot of heat that the Cs bind to the oxygen, and we have CO2 as an emission, and we get the ferro. And that's great because we need the ferro, but what do we do with the CO2? Well, some steel mills are now having energy efficiency measures or capturing the CO2 and putting it in old gas pits under the ground, but avoid emissions in the air. So that's a first step. And that is about, say, 5% of their steel manufacturing. And that 5% of steel is then close to CO2 neutral, and we buy that. And the rest is as bad as it was before. So it's not perfect, but you can't make the world perfect on day one, right? If you have a path, you need to go step by step. And we buy that, and we buy it at a premium, and we offer that to our partners, and we see a high interest from you. And that is not a huge effort or an incredibly costly effort. It's there, it's available, you just need to do it. And the more we buy from ArcelorMittal of green steel, the more they will manufacture that way, and step by step we get the ball rolling. Now, if you then see the CO2 impact by buying this Bruinzeel green steel of a climate neutral company, you drop your CO2 emissions to 270 grams CO2 per kilo of steel. So less than 1/10 on the industry standard. So it's not easy, it's not difficult also, it's there. It's available. And then the next step will be that you manufacture steel not with Cs, right, to get the ferro-oxide as an inductor separated, but with hydrogen, and then ideally hydrogen made by electricity, solar, wind. Electrolysis, separate the oxygen from the H, capture the H, use that as an inductor, and then you get H2O, right, as a residue instead of CO2. That's now, we're working with a few plants at the moment. The pilot plant is in Sweden available at SSAB, but also with ArcelorMittal and which H2O green steel, where also we invest in. So these technologies are there. You need to embrace them, and it's possible. Now, a comparison, because if I say things, I like to have them fact-based. So if you look at 1 square meter built environment based on a meta study of 10,000 buildings, we talk on average 400 kilos of CO2 per square meter. And that's because of the steel, because of the concrete, because of all the elements put in, right? And then you use a static shelf, which you probably have. Well, on average, there are a good 100 kilos of CO2. And that square meter needs annually to be cooled, heated, and so forth, which is about 50 kilos of CO2. So over 20 years period, that square meter emit 1,500 kilos, so 1,500 kilos of CO2. Alternatively, you go for a mobile solution. That means you can save 1 square meter. That square meter saved also does not have to be cooled, heated, lighted, but the the storage solution is far more dense, so the 100 kilos of CO2 become 300 kilos of CO2. But if you look over 20 years period, if you use a standard steel, right, you go to 300 kilos of CO2, that's the 80% saving of CO2, which I showed you in the first chart. And if you go to the Bruinzeel green steel, so the CO2 reduced steel, you already can now reduce the CO2 emissions on this solution by 98%. So it's not fantasy, it's there. And now, back to Dr. Wildcat, it's about culture. Do we want to do things? Do we want to embrace this? Do we want to say, whatever, all equal, and we want the best solution, but we require a max X kilo of CO2 on the solution someone provides? And that's you who should demand that. We have it available. And it's not that it's a higher premium price or whatever. It's available. So you can also make impact, like we try to make impact. And that's, I fully agree, the cultural thing. Now, then that's about CO2. If we talk about your head of procurement or your budget holder or whatever, you talk money, right? Also, I guess. So if you look at a square meter, that's the top part. That's the strange people in Europe, they work with square meters. But take the two bottom ones, the square feet. What does a commercial, and obviously I should have put here museum square meter, so forgive my ignorance, but if you look at a building cost square feet in North America, in retail, we talk between 200 and 500 US dollars. Office commercial, 600 to 1,000. And healthcare, very expensive square meters, over 1,000. So by going mobile, you save a lot of money. So you have your argument to go to your budget holders, I hope, to say, I have a solution for you and I will help you saving money, right? Then permitting, it's clear, right? Going to an existing building, taking static outputting mobile in, or building a smaller building that saves you time, right? And something, time is also money, could be, I don't know. Anyway, if you look at Canada, Royal British Columbia, is there anyone from the BC Museum here? No, all busy with the new build, I guess. There we are very proudly partnering with them. That's a project which is a 20 million US dollar plus on storage solutions. And they choose in the end for us because we had this Bruinzeel green steel. So they wanted to go for a CO2 friendly, as much friendly as possible, 98% saving on CO2 solution right now. So we're incredibly proud and that we partner with them. And that saves them 8.5 million kilos of CO2. So that's impact. And it saves them also 50 million US dollars by going to a compact solution, right? So nearly the price what they paid for our storage solution. So it is about people, planet, profit. And I don't need to explain you, being from Holland, the rising sea levels, what that cost is, if I may say, in raising dikes, right? So, as we say, don't be penny wise, pound foolish. Do the right thing. Well, that's one element, ESG, right? I know it might be a topic which not everyone wants to hear, environment, social, governance, but we try to contribute their part. So everything I say has been audited by independent auditors, right, as I mentioned. So please challenge us, go to our website, ask for the proof. You should always ask for proof if people promise you nice stories, to be sure it's true and independently verified. Honesty counts, if I may refer to you, and not nice words only, but be honest, be integer, right? That lasts longest anyway. We are committed to net zero, not by 2045, but by the steps we make with partners like, for instance, ArcelorMittal steel mill, which we're dependent upon. We are now confident that we can accelerate our climate neutrality, not by 2045, as you saw initially in the movie, but by 2035. And we're science-based target approved. Okay? And we are now working with Delta also to get that going. Then we partner with the UN Global Compact. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, we are currently hitting and contributing to 13 out of 17. And we are EcoVadis, which is a global norm for temperature. If I would say you have 2 Fahrenheit and Celsius, EcoVadis is the independent norm. We are gold, meaning you're at the top 3 or 5% of most green companies in the world, whether it's Fortune 500 or much smaller companies like ourselves. Right? And you can say, yeah, but you're smaller, so it's easier. Well, not always, because I need to move a big tanker like ArcelorMittal to do the right thing. But we're able, and we're now in the top 5. Competing with big car manufacturers like BMW or Volvo. So you can make impact also as the little guy, like me. And it starts by walking and doing it yourself. And you all in the audience can have a huge impact in doing the right thing. Then, if I look at social capital, we are partnering with Oxfam Novib, Entrepreneurs for Entrepreneurs program, which is highly motivating for our own employees, right? You can help someone in Africa starting his own furniture business. Or with the plastic reuse, it's not upcycling. One could say it's the same value in the value chain, or a bit downcycling, but better than in nature, building bricks. Or with our social employment partnership, where we make a lot of half fabricates in Holland over the last 20 years. Then, if you look at the Charles Darwin Foundation, you were referring to it. We are very proud that we've been partnering, and we are now, as we speak, installing the rails for the Darwin collection, Species of Mankind, in their new depot. They choose, obviously, for Bruinzeel and Bruinzeel Green Steel, but we are partnering for the next 25 or 20 years, and that's a 6-figure financial contribution from us, to restoring the biodiversity and bringing back the Scalesia forestation, which has been overgrown by all the nice visitors, bringing blueberry seeds in their souls. And obviously that's critical for the insects, the dragonflies, etc., the birds, for the Komodo vran, and get the ecosystem going. Then Delta, what can we contribute? Well, we preserve to your cultural heritage, meaning protect light, dust, moisture, humidity, temperature, pest invitation, and people. And Liz Crooks, I think, is here as well, but also on water we have fantastic protection, and she will later be able to explain to you that 20,000 gallons of water coming down from a broken water pipe still protected the collection inside without any issue. But that's better if she explains it than me saying it here. Then design materials matter, right? So having it hermetically sealed museum-grade cabinets, avoiding off-gassing of toxic materials, having a extremely slow air interchange of 5 days, from inside air to outside air, for humidity, for temperature, protecting your collection. And not glued, or as you say, silicon glued strips, no, inlay, a non-off-gassing powder coating, polyethylene plugs, blah, blah. Come and see it later at the trip we're going to organize at the Delta factory, 15 minutes, 20 minutes away from here. So get the proof yourself. And they're definitely built to last. But I think Maria and others can better explain this in a 2 minutes movie.
I've always had a real deep curiosity about the natural world.
As young as I can remember, I've wanted to do work with animals.
My mom would take me to art classes that my local museum would have.
I had a rock and mineral collection.
A traveling Van Gogh exhibit came to the National Gallery, and I was just amazed. That was when really my love for museums was solidified.
By 3rd grade, I had decided that I wanted to become an archaeologist.
Probably from high school, I knew I wanted to work in a museum.
It was that ability to connect with people from the past. There are certain pieces that you sort of gravitate towards. We have some just really extraordinary material from early Peru.
Within the mammal collection, I'm pretty partial to bats. Central Park 1890.
Our Mamluk carpet collection is one of our real special collections. There are not many of these carpets that survive in the world.
Over half of all described species of bees in the world are in this room.
We have almost 180,000 specimens in this collection.
The Textile Museum's collection was 20,000 plus objects. Storage is very important to us.
Without proper care and storage of these pieces, they would be lost to time.
It always happens that you never know the question you want to ask until sort of it's too late. And then you can't go back and reconstruct the populations and the collections, historically to track what happened. But with natural history collections, you can do that.
A collection of cultural objects such as we have is really important to making people understand that other cultures aren't all that different from us.
The work that we do is important because species are disappearing at such a rapid rate.
There's incredible variety and diversity.
And we're trying to understand what's there really before it's gone.
After all these years of doing archaeology, it's still very magical to me.
It's pure joy to me to open a drawer of something that I really know nothing about and just dig in.
I get to be around these historic objects that are sometimes thousands of years old that people might never otherwise lay eyes on, and I get to ensure that that survives.
It's really important to have public programs and exhibits because you want to stay connected to the public and you want to continue that role as educators. But we also have to maintain our collections as long as we possibly can.
And you can never go back in time to that place and make that collection again. If you think of them that way, they're totally irreplaceable.
And our cabinets are really our first line of defense.
We all want to be able to touch the past, and the longer you can keep the past around, then the further back you can really experience.
Collections will always be at the heart of every museum.
I love that movie. So coming to my closing remarks, we have many references, so many clients, partners of us, you can ask about how is this company Delta, how is Bounzil, right? So do your due diligence, do your research, and then hear back. And we're there, good, bad times, right? And if you come to our factory, you can see many of the solutions we make tailored for you. We also like to share knowledge, and that's why we want to be here and learn from you. But we also organize on an annual, biannual base, an international museum event where we get people like you from all over the world sharing experiences, learning from each other, and understanding better your needs, and talk peer-to-peer, colleague to colleague. If you're interested, please come to me today, tomorrow, or to my colleagues, and we're happy to facilitate that, to put you on the list. We love to get you over. So concluding, what can we do and what have we done so far? So if you look at the 10 points we started with, we believe we are trying to help you with lack of funding by making solutions which save money. Yes, which save space by going mobile, going for the adequate solution, train your staff, come to our museum events, share knowledge, preventive conservation issues, certainly by having the right solutions, have accessibility and communication, right? So that depends on how you want to see the collection, through glass, through a door, in a drawer, and have the security concerns that they're protected well in terms of quality, in terms of airflow, in terms of temperature interchange, in terms of human interaction, and certainly work on the impact of climate change. And you can make a difference. So we aim with our company, right, to preserve your cultural heritage for the next 500 years in the best sustainable way, to make sure your collection survives and the planet survives. And therefore, your work will be very relevant, even more so than already now, because it will be there for centuries. Thanks a lot for your attention. I hope not to have bothered you too much with a commercial break, but I just want to show that also you can demand from your suppliers that they contribute to your objectives. Please come and see us in the break, or we continue with the next presentation. Andy, we do. Thanks a lot.
All righty, we're running a little bit behind, so if you have any questions for Alexander or his team, please go up and see them. Our next presenter is Dr. Jocelyn Kallela. She is the curator of mammalogy in the Biodiversity Institute and professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at KU. Jocelyn is an evolutionary biologist interested in genomic mechanisms of adaptation and hybridization amongst mammals, with an acute interest in biodiversity conservation. Dr. Kallela completed her graduate education at the University of New Mexico, where she was classically trained in scientific collecting and curation at the Museum of Southwestern Biology. Her dissertation research focused on the evolutionary and conservation consequences of global glacial secondary contact and hybridization among high-latitude mustelids. Her postdoctoral research at the University of New Hampshire aimed to identify genomic mechanisms of dehydration tolerance in desert-adapted rodents to characterize complex mammalian responses to their environment. Dr. Kallella's current research program utilizes museum collections, both old and new, to understand how organisms change through time by integrated genomics, morphometrics, physiology, and ecology. The presentation title is Natural History Collections, a One Health Nexus.
Thank you. I'm Jocelyn. This has been a wild plenary. I think we started with culture, we got a little commercial, and I'm hoping to bring some collections. So hopefully, I realize I'm the only thing standing between you and probably a coffee break and maybe the bathroom. But I promise I'll try to keep it to 30 minutes. So thank you for the introduction. Today I'm talking about how museums are already positioned to be this nexus with One Health. So what is a nexus? A nexus is just a connection or a series of connections that link two or more things. And in this case, I'm talking about the connection between the physical specimens in natural history museums and the research and policy in One Health or health-related research. So the concept of One Health, if you're not familiar with it, acknowledges the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health, whereby improving the health or understanding of one of those dimensions can thereby produce a more complete picture of all of the others. I think chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a really good example here. This is where misfolding proteins or prions can exist in the environment. They can be taken up by plants and eventually infect animals. CWD is highly lethal to cervids or deer, with related neurological diseases observed in humans and risks for consuming meat that has been infected. Therefore, understanding where these prions come from, how they're persisting in environment, and how they're moving between different organisms is informative for all dimensions of One Health: humans, animals, and environments. As the curator of mammals here at the KU Biodiversity Institute and Natural History Museum, the connection between health and museum specimens are often very explicit for me. This is because the majority of emerging diseases in humans come from non-human animals, with most of those coming from mammals. So if we take a step back, though, this is not just relevant to mammals. Museums also house agricultural pests and disease vectors and entomology divisions, botanical specimens that are relevant to food security, and parasites and pathogens that threaten wildlife health, including chytrid fungus in amphibians, which is the most deadly wildlife disease ever recorded. And yet, health research rarely, if ever, utilizes natural history museums. And today, I want to address why this is a missed opportunity for us as a museum community. I'm going to walk through 5 perceived barriers to integration between natural history museum biorepositories and biomedicine. This is historical inertia, public perception, budgets and capacity, non-reproducible science, and translation error. And for each, I will identify a proactive step that we either are taking or we can take to strengthen that connection and grow natural history museums and collections into the future. Now, you can note throughout the rest of this talk, I will identify proactive solutions in the color blue. Starting with historical inertia. Inertia is the tendency of an object to resist change. That is, objects in motion stay in motion. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest. Natural history collections were founded by naturalists to serve the systematics and biodiversity communities, and we have done that very, very well. But I would say we are a little bit at rest in that those are the communities that we are continuing to serve, and we are having a harder time reaching out to other communities like health or engineering or computer science, social science, perhaps because we're just less familiar with those groups. That historical inertia or that resistance to change is really not serving us. It's preventing us from evolving and adapting to meet the needs of a 21st century science or to reach the potential of modern natural history collections. And as a result, museums are closing at alarming rates. So I know we just saw the growth of museums. I don't know if that's including natural history museums. That's not the experience that I have as a curator have had. Duke, Tulane's Herbarium, the Delbridge Museum in South Dakota, Nebraska's State Museum, Louisiana Monroe, and Iowa have all shut down within the last decade. Even the Smithsonian, the National Museum of Natural History, is no longer loaning mammal specimens. Open their website, you can see it. This is in part because these collections are not well utilized by the broader scientific community who could serve as valuable advocates for the utility and long-term retention of these collections. To change this, we need to upend our business as usual approach to collections and intentionally expand the breadth and diversity of our user and contributor communities. That is the community of scientists that are using specimens and contributing to collections. Okay, great. How do we do that, right? This has been partially accomplished through the idea of the extended specimen, which hopefully this group is very familiar with. This is the idea of using old specimens in new ways. Yet the ways in which a specimen can actually be used are pretty limited by how it was originally collected. Therefore, to better connect with other disciplines, and specifically in this case, the health community, we need to make an adjustment earlier in the process, early in their pipeline when specimens are being collected. Here in KU Mammalogy, we practice the process of holistic collecting. That is the intentional preservation of all parts of an organism, regardless of the immediate goals of the research project. So as a geneticist, instead of just taking an ear clip for my investigation or a fecal swab for some pathogen investigation, we sample internal, external parasites, multiple types of tissue, liver, kidney, heart, spleen, lung, many others. Some of those are immediately frozen in liquid nitrogen in the field, while others are preserved in DNA, RNA later, or DNA, RNA shield. We take standard measurements on everything, ecological field notes, record habitat data, take photos, fungal swabs, the list goes on and on. This style of collecting, or holistic collecting, further respects the life of the animal by maximizing its scientific value, ensuring that those samples can be used for more than one research question. This adjustment then, earlier in the pipeline, exponentially increases opportunities for scientific extension, as well as for synthesis across different fields and data types by uniting all of that disparate information back to the same physical specimen. By intentionally prioritizing data and sample types that are relevant to these different disciplines, museums can then increase our loan and research output in those areas. And I'll show you a very quick example of the power of holistic collecting from my own research. So from the 1980s to today, the Museum of Southwestern Biology, which is at the University of New Mexico, who's heard of it? Okay, go Bows. We worked with hunters, obviously I wasn't there in the 80s, but I was there afterwards. The museum worked with hunters, trappers, and subsistence communities in Alaska and Canada to archive more than 8,000 marten carcasses. If you don't know what a marten is, here's one in real life. Each specimen was legally harvested to sell their fur, and the trappers chose to donate or deposit the remaining carcass with the museum. At the museum, each carcass was then holistically sampled, which meant that by the time I started researching martens in 2015, I could immediately conduct population-level genomic analyses that would have otherwise been impossible within the timeline of, say, a graduate degree. The average lifespan of a marten is about 5 years, so that's same duration of a PhD here in the US. Therefore, I could not, nor would I want to, remove thousands of martens from the environment during that time. Even if I could, and it didn't affect marten populations, a 3 to 5 year sampling horizon does not allow me to address long-term population changes that are relevant to evolution or conservation. Instead, cumulative community-assembled archives, natural history museums, are really the only option for me, as well as for other investigations looking at larger-bodied species, those of conservation concern, cultural significance, or intense regulation. Because all of those specimens already existed, I was able to use GPS occurrences to build ecological niche models of the two North American marten species. This is the American and Pacific marten, shown here in red and blue respectively. Because each occurrence record is associated with a cryogenically frozen tissue, my colleagues and I then genotyped hundreds of martens from a contact zone in western Montana to identify hybrids, shown here in purple. And then we used this information to test how the range dynamics between the two species change when they're in contact compared to when they're separate. And this work was recently published in Landscape Ecology. From there, we expanded to whole genome sequencing, and we could do this because the tissues that we used in the original investigation were not consumed during that investigation. So here we documented hybridization both in western Montana and in southeast Alaska, and we found a signature of genetic swamping in Pacific martens. As a third extension to those exact same specimens, I was able to take the investigation of the host, the marten, a step further by digging into their parasites. I sequenced and analyzed the genomes of more than 20 stomach nematodes from both species, and I'm looking at patterns of host switching and coevolution within the context of host biogeography. And even more recently, we've extended the same specimens even further by sequencing their viral communities. So in the 5 weasel species shown here, I promise if you can squint and read them on the far left, there are martens included, both species found here in North America. We found 10 different viruses in these 5 weasels. These viruses represent 5 different viral families. The column on the far right side of this table indicates % similarity with sequences in GenBank. So a value of 100% here would indicate that we've already found that exact same virus sequence. Values below 80% represent potentially new viral species. We won't get into that. And what's even cooler, depending on your definition of species, is that 4 of these new viruses are unclassified at the genus level. So this represents a major increase in our understanding of viral diversity in this group. Now, these martens were caught by trappers. They were not collected as part of viral surveillance efforts or outbreak response. They were seemingly healthy animals, but contributed to our understanding of host pathogen dynamics. And they serve as a great example of the untapped opportunity for museums to connect with public health research and funding opportunities. The second barrier to collaboration between biorepositories and biomedicine is public perception of natural history museums, and specifically the serious disconnect between what museums actually are doing behind the scenes and what the public sees and therefore thinks that we do. At some point in our history, we realized that the stuff we have is really cool, right? It is. And that if we share it with others, we can probably make money to sustain ourselves. And that has worked, but it has also split our mission into both public serving and research serving. And it has unintentionally trained generations of now administrators that the role of museums is to entertain their children, because their only exposure to museums was during grade school field trips. In this way, we are failing to advertise ourselves to the community of health researchers and really to the broader scientific community. While the current state of public understanding of museums is bleak, the good news is that we can change this. Not overnight, but certainly with time and effort, and specifically by communicating and educating adult audiences. So these audiences represent taxpayers who are funding most of the research that we are doing with collections, a public audience that's capable of understanding how research connects with and enhances their lives, other scientists who may wish to use natural history museums but may not yet understand our role as biorepositories, and importantly, administrators or future administrators who are making decisions about space and budgets. Ultimately, if we don't invest in educating adults in this way, we may cease to exist, as we have seen for many natural history collections in the last 10 years. That leads to our third barrier, which is budget and capacity. These are very real limitations for all museums, and I do not mean to trivialize that in any way. I want to take a moment, though, to reflect on a quote from Joseph Grinnell. He is the father of the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology at California, Berkeley, and Grinnell said, "The greatest purpose of our museum will not be realized until the lapse of many years, possibly a century. And this is that the student of the future will have access to the original record of faunal conditions." This ethos fuels the continued careful inventory of biodiversity despite temporary logistical challenges, that is, budgets and capacity. At a time of unprecedented biological change, we cannot afford to not document this change. So even so, space and financial limitations, unfortunately, are not going to miraculously resolve themselves for inactive collections. We need to be tracking research products, demonstrating collections use, and importantly, communicating the relevance of those resources to broader audiences. That includes tracking the number of incoming and outgoing loans, incoming and outgoing specimens, receiving institutions and labs, publications that are utilizing specimens, and the number of federal grants that our collections are supporting, not just the ones that we have secured ourselves. Among other details relevant, these are all relevant to administrators and funding agencies. And what's better than quantitative metrics? Automated quantitative metrics, because a lot of you are probably collection managers, and who has time to track all of this individually? No one. Thankfully, modern collections management platforms like Arctos can do that for you. If you're interested in learning more about the Arctos Museum database, please join the Into the Arctosverse Symposium. That will be from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. this Friday in the Jayhawk room. I believe Emily Breaker will be there, and she made this lovely poster. So this is a schematic of the Arctos digital ecosystem, and if I remove a little detail, sorry, Emily, we can see how Arctos connects or relates specimen and specimen part usage to publications, projects, media projects, or media products and agents. So Arctos can then automatically create reports on collections usage, including direct and indirect research outputs. Sweet. Second, the limited budget and capacity of museums should really motivate a stronger connection with health research, because health research receives significantly more funding every single year compared to basic science. So here's a chart of federal research spending by agency. Below the giant blue blob that represents defense, there is a thin blue line that represents the National Science Foundation. So that would be NSF, where we're efficiently getting money back from. And then below that is a large orange band. That's NIH. So that's the National Institutes of Health. So that is more than 5 times the annual spending that NSF has. So partnering with the health sector, therefore, represents a significant opportunity for expanded budgets and capacity for museums. For that exchange to be successful, early connections must be established between museums and health researchers who are sampling wildlife before they have collected samples. This allows for proactive development of repository agreements that acknowledge the space and long-term care needs of incoming material, and allows health researchers to budget accordingly to support museum infrastructure and personnel time in their grants. They can do that. We just have to open the conversation. So for more details on this, I encourage you to check out a paper called The Open Specimen Movement, which was published in Bioscience in 2020. The fourth challenge, I promise I only have 5. Fourth challenge lies in the differing sampling cultures between museums and health-related initiatives. So pathogen surveillance has historically relied on fast, non-invasive, but consumptive sampling like swabs. And this allows you to screen many individuals affordably. While museums have traditionally relied on whole organism, specimen-based sampling. While there's, of course, a time and place for both of these methods, the goals are rather similar, or can often be very similar, and increased reciprocity would benefit both communities. That is, museums being more open to preserving the types of samples or types of vouchers that are coming in from the health community. This might include swabs or blood or other samples that are appropriate for medical or veterinary diagnostics, and veterinary surveillance programs preserving at least a subset of voucher specimens, thereby acknowledging the importance of vouchers as a taxonomic backbone for their work and a critical means of scientific extension and replicability. There has been a major push in the sciences for increased transparency, openness, and reproducibility. Some of it's working. Many journals are now requiring the open publication of data prior to the publication of a manuscript. Yet, counterintuitively, those requirements are rarely prioritizing primary data. As an example, out of the top 100 ranked journals in biology or biological sciences, more than half explicitly mention the deposition of molecular sequence information. This is a text file with 4 letters in it, repeated in different orders. This is in a public repository you may have heard of called GenBank. Less than 1/5 of those, though, mention the permanent deposition of specimens or physical samples, which are the primary data from where those files with a bunch of letters, those genetic sequences, came from. So without access to specimens or samples, we can't resequence that original material. We can never replicate or validate that work, which is a core tenet of science. So creating a museum culture where scientists are encouraged to deposit material will help promote a more replicable science. To help shift sampling cultures in the health sector, museums also need to engage in this cross-disciplinary training. As an example of this, I know some of you are already involved in this. I am leading a group called the Museums and Emerging Pathogens in the Americas, or MEPA group. This is a virtual community of practice that meets on Zoom every other week to identify synergies, share new research, and collaboratively problem solve with the goal of bringing museum biorepositories and biomedical initiatives together across the Americas. The group is comprised of medical practitioners, students, museum professionals, and agency biologists. And last November, we offered the first MEPA Field Genomics Workshop. This was held in Ecuador and led by my lab here at KU. The first week of that workshop focused on biological field work. So we did holistic specimen preparation in the field and talked a lot about the importance of specimen vouchering. The second week, we used nanopore sequencing, a sequencer that's smaller than a candy bar here in the US, and did basic bioinformatic pipelines on participants' laptops to identify hosts and pathogens in real time. Participants joined from 8 different countries across Latin America, and most were not even from the museum community, but all of them left with an appreciation of vouchering and the role of museums in health research and sampling. The last barrier I want to address here is translation error. This barrier, see the cartoon's really good though. This barrier acknowledges that different communities, in this case, museums and health, he's the epitome of health, right? We use different vocabularies. We often have different goals. And to bridge this gap, we need to prioritize the data needs of other disciplines, specifically in the way we serve biodiversity data online, such that it is searchable, discoverable, and useful to those communities. And it's our responsibility to clearly communicate use expectations of specimens. This is a new audience that may not be familiar with traditional loan expectations. So this is where we can really help with education. The first is already well underway. To prioritize data needed by other disciplines, we need to continue to develop biodiversity and collection management databases to accommodate new fields and data structures. I have a couple examples here. As a molecular biologist myself, the information related to tissue quality, preservation style, and phase changes is essential for determining whether a sample will be useful for generating data on a certain sequencing platform. For example, if a tissue has been collected into liquid nitrogen in the field and it never left liquid nitrogen, awesome. I can use long-read sequencing methods with that tissue. But if the tissue was collected in nitrogen and moved into a freezer and held at a different temperature or placed in a buffer, I need to know all of those details and how long it was in each of those states in order for me to know what technologies I can use with it. So we call this tracking cold chain. And we are currently trying to implement this here at KU, but I know that it is also already implemented in the Arctos Museum database that tracks all of those phase changes and communicates those to molecular biologists who need that to determine if those tissues will work for their research. This is but, again, one example of how we can better meet the needs of a 21st century science. Similarly, parasites and pathogens that are collected from a vertebrate host, say a mammal, are often of intense interest to the public health community. Yet, as a mammalogist, I'm often ill-equipped to identify that parasite to the species level. It's usually coarsely labeled as nematode, cestode, flea, tick. It's terrible, I know. But we need to be building partnerships with parasitologists, or better yet, building those divisions within our institutions so that A, those specimens have somewhere to go, and B, they can be accurately identified, and C, we have the databasing structures and taxonomies in place to allow those data to be searchable by those communities. And that means more than just searchable by the host, but also searchable by the pathogen. The exact same framework can be then extended to bacterial pathogens, viral pathogens, or fungal pathogens. Another complexity that emerges with the detection of parasites and pathogens is the need to report sampling effort, detection method, and absences. Again, fields that are often missing from museum databases, but critical to understanding and interpreting and using those data. So this is an example from the work of my postdoc, Marlon Cobos. This is the country of Panama, if you can't tell where you're looking in the world. But this is looking at a host and a pathogen. The pathogen is hantavirus. And on the bottom left, we have an example of 20 years of mammal surveillance. And all of the gray dots are individuals that have been screened for hantavirus. All of the red dots are individuals that tested positive. These positives do inform us where hantavirus is likely to be found, but the negatives are equally as informative. So all of those gray dots are just as informative to the models on the right as these red dots. So now we have these predictive models of where we expect to see hantavirus, which is a disease maintained in wild mammals, but that is capable of infecting humans. So this is very relevant to the health industry. We need to be able to report both of these. All of this information is available in the Arctos Museum database, including how the samples were screened, as well as the result, positive or negative, based on serology. Last, engaging with the health community does bring with it some potential risks. Most obvious is perhaps the risk of commercial exploitation, that is, using the materials in our collections for things like vaccine development or other big pharma applications. For most collections, I would expect this is probably not allowed. And it's really up to us as the stewards of these materials to make sure we're drafting loan policies that clearly outline appropriate uses of specimens. These communities are new, they don't know, and it is up to us to engage judgment-free in those conversations. Pathogens also represent a major proportion of global biodiversity, and the vast majority of those have no impact on human health. Therefore, there's significant biodiversity discovery to be had in this space without any commercial exploitation. So having those transparent conversations with prospective users can mitigate this before it becomes an issue. We've covered a lot of ground, and I know everyone needs coffee. I just want to outline that I've shown you 5 perceived barriers to integration between museums and health, yet we've also reviewed at least 5 ways in which we can improve or foster that connection. So I just want to revisit those solutions. The first is holistic sampling. That is adjusting the way that we collect in order to maximize the scientific value and extension potential of each specimen in our care. This adjustment earlier in the specimen pipeline can immediately serve the health community as well as our own community. Educating adults. That includes college-age students, parents, scientists, and administrators to understand the value of collections and their role in modern research. 3, bridging financially with the health community. We know that NIH's budget is nearly 5 times that of NSF. So if we can proactively establish specimen management plans with health partners, museums have much to gain in lieu of our own budgets and capacity. Embracing alternative vouchers, that includes tissue, blood, swabs, to make biological sciences more reproducible. This involves building partnerships that respect the costs associated with long-term care and maintenance of specimens, but also see the importance of vouchering at least a subset of their material to ensure that their science is reproducible, while encouraging museums to be a little more flexible about what might comprise a scientific voucher. And last, training and communication. While biodiversity and health sciences may have different sampling and archival cultures, intentional cross-disciplinary training and clear communication regarding appropriate uses of specimens can help bridge that gap. So overall, the take-home message here is that we just need some mutual reciprocity between natural history museums and health scientists to benefit both enterprises, acknowledging and embracing our role as biorepositories, accepting samples from and serving samples to those communities is our core mission, and I believe we are well positioned to do this. So with that, I'm happy to thank my labs, all of the museums who have contributed to my research and that of my students, and I'm happy to take questions. We're probably out of time.
We are indeed very much out of time. We have taken up some of your coffee break. Our next session starts at 11 o'clock, so you have 18 minutes to grab yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. I want to thank all three of our presenters in our plenary session. I hope it was worth the while. Thank you so much.